Everything flipped when, after my son's passing, my daughter-in-law tossed me out as if I were garbage. During the will reading, she taunted me. "You won't see a dime from your son's estate. I guarantee it." But the lawyer grinned and added, "There's one final clause, the most crucial one." When he revealed it, my daughter-in-law collapsed. You won't believe what it said. Before we go on, please subscribe to the channel and comment below with the current time where you are. At last, I can relax. Michael was so tough to look after these past months. The words struck me like freezing rain. I stood rigid next to my son's coffin, the funeral booklet shaking in my grasp. Elena glanced at her phone once more, swiping through texts as though she hadn't just referred to my deceased son as a load she'd finally unloaded. "Elena," my voice broke through the chilly April breeze. "We just laid my son to rest. Have some decency for the departed." She lifted her gaze from her device, annoyance flickering over her flawlessly painted face. The gust sliced through the graveyard, tossing the red roses Patricia had set on adjacent headstones. Other attendees headed to their vehicles, but their chats had halted. They were eavesdropping now. Your son Elena's chuckle was harsh, sour. He was my spouse, Charles, and now it's all mine. The funeral booklet ripped a bit in my clutch. My architect's brain, always exact, couldn't grasp what I heard. This lady had been by Michael's side for 8 years. She'd vowed to cherish him in illness and wellness. Yet here she was, 40 minutes after we'd placed him in the earth, discussing assets and control. "What's the matter with you?" I murmured, though my words traveled farther than planned. "At least act like you're grieving." Mark Sullivan, Michael's company associate, had paused his steps. He lingered 25 feet off, supporting his wife's elbow. Both stared at us in open astonishment. Patricia Hayes drew nearer, her complexion ashen with worry. Elena tucked her phone into her luxury handbag. "Grieving. Charles. I've been mapping my fresh start for weeks. Michael knew this union was finished. We both did. That's untrue." The response emerged choked. "He adored you, even as the cancer. The cancer came in handy." She fixed her pricey black jacket, the one Michael had gifted her last holiday. "It provided me moments to reflect, to scheme. Now I can truly exist again." Patricia arrived just as Elena pivoted toward the lot. "Elena, please. This isn't the moment or spot." "Actually, Patricia, this is precisely the moment." Elena's stilettos tapped on the asphalt trail. "I've devoted 20 months to acting the loyal partner. I'm finished with the act." The leftover visitors clustered in tiny groups, murmuring to each other, "Mrs." Patterson from the congregation shook her head gradually. The 4 guys from Michael's design crew appeared uneasy, shifting their weight and dodging gazes. I observed Elena stride off, her gait assured and intentional. She hadn't cried once at the ceremony, not a drop. While I'd scarcely kept it together delivering the tribute, she'd perched in the first row, glancing at her timepiece and drumming her polished nails on the oak seat. "Charles?" Patricia's palm brushed my arm. "Are you okay?" I couldn't reply. My throat ached, stripped bare by shock and rising fury. The lady Michael had entrusted with his existence, his enterprise, his affection. She'd been tallying the days till his demise, plotting her getaway while he battled for each gasp. The breeze strengthened, shaking the naked limbs above. Elena arrived at her gold BMW, the one Michael had astonished her with for their 6th milestone. She didn't glance rearward, not even once. Lingering by my son's burial site, I pondered what Michael would feel if he could witness her now. Would he feel shattered, enraged, or had he guessed what I was just starting to comprehend? The lavish vehicle departed, vanishing around the cemetery's bent path. I was solitary now, save for Patricia, who lingered patiently nearby, and the caretakers afar, readying to cover the plot. My palms still trembled as I gazed at Michael's image in the damaged booklet. His grin gazed back, bold and kind, as he'd always been, even in those closing days, placing secretive calls to William Carter and assuring all would be handled. Gazing at Michael's visage in that photo, I sensed something fracture within my chest. Not sorrow this time, something profounder. Pride blended with frantic yearning for one additional talk with my talented lad. The gust scattered further bloom petals over the new burial soil. I shut my eyes and permitted myself to recall. Michael, at 9 years old, positioned in our shed studio with toy rocket adhesive on his digits and resolve in his blue eyes. He'd demanded to color his rockets green and silver rather than the lifelike blue and white the guide proposed. "Dad, why must rockets be blue?" he'd inquired, displaying his vivid green spaceship. I aim to craft mine unique, exceptional. Even then, he'd declined to adhere to standard guidelines, while other children assembled their kits precisely as instructed. Michael innovated. He'd alter fin shapes, tweak launch pads, devise his own hue patterns. Half his rockets failed on trial launches, but the successes were magnificent. I reopened my eyes and examined the photo again. That identical, obstinate ingenuity had earned him fortunes. Columbia University kin supper in 2017. Michael detailing his newest venture notion while waving his spoon eagerly. His mom had passed the prior year, and these weekend meals had grown sacred for us both. "I have a concept for an app that could aid folks in managing their timetables better," he'd stated, eyes sparkling with potential. "But not mere planners. Dad, something that studies your routines, forecasts your needs, assists in wiser choices about your hours." I'd fretted he was aiming too high. "Son, there are plenty of planning apps already, but none that reason like people do." He'd withdrawn his device, doodling layouts on tissues. What if tech could genuinely simplify our lives instead of complicating them? That app turned into Schedule Harmony. Within 3 years, he'd sold it for $14 million. But the recollection that wounded deepest was from merely 4 years back. Michael had journeyed to my residence in Westwood, showing up unannounced on a Wednesday night with wine and tidings that would alter all. "Dad, I'll support you in retirement. You've labored sufficiently." He'd displayed his phone revealing Innova Tech Design's recent assessment report. $75 million. "Dad, can you imagine I couldn't? My son, who'd once constructed green rockets in my shed, had forged something worth more cash than I'd amassed in my whole profession as a structural architect." "Michael, that's amazing, but I don't require—" "Yes, you do." His tone had been steadfast yet tender. "You've nurtured me my entire life. Allow me to reciprocate. I'm purchasing that studio you've always desired, the one with adequate airflow and all the equipment you've envisioned. That studio rests in my yard now, scarcely utilized since his detection. I'd been too occupied tending to him to create anything." Patricia cleared her throat gently. "Charles, it's chilling. Perhaps we should—" I shook my head. I wasn't prepared to abandon him yet. Not when these remembrances were all I retained of his tone, his chuckle, his utter conviction that all would resolve nicely. Michael had always been an organizer, even as a kid. He'd charted his days, his endeavors, his aspirations with architectural accuracy that mirrored mine. He'd inherited that from me, the urge to comprehend how things functioned, to mend issues before they turned calamities. But there was one issue he couldn't mend, one schedule he couldn't command. The memory I'd evaded all day forced its way ahead. Michael's call 20 months ago, his voice steady despite the news that would ruin all we'd schemed. "Dad, I have cancer, but I'm going to combat this." Standing there in the graveyard gust, I realized I needed to recall that struggle too, not just the joyful times, but the conflict that had revealed who my son truly was and who his spouse truly was. The call that transformed everything arrived on a Wednesday morning in October 2024. I was reconstructing my neighbor's gate when Michael phoned, his voice oddly official. "Dad, I have cancer, but I'm going to battle this. Liver cancer, stage 4. The terms struck like mallet strikes. Aggressive, progressed, grim outlook. I abandoned my tools and drove directly to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, where Michael was consulting his cancer specialists. He appeared diminished in that clinic bed, but his eyes were resolute. Elena sat alongside him, impeccably poised, already jotting notes on her device about therapy timelines and arrangements. The physicians estimate chemotherapy might grant us 24 months, perhaps 3 years if fortunate. Michael had clarified, his enterprise mindset already navigating possibilities. "I've set Mark to manage daily functions at Innovatech. Doctor." Anderson outlined the therapy strategy: intensive chemotherapy every 4 weeks, potential operation if tumors reacted, beam treatment to control discomfort. Michael listened as if organizing a product debut, posing detailed queries about achievement rates and adverse effects. "I'll transport you to sessions," I'd declared right away. Elena glanced up from her phone. "Actually, Charles, I can manage his health visits. You needn't concern yourself." But within 4 months, her stance had shifted entirely. May 2025, Michael was midway through his chemotherapy course, and the sessions were savage. He'd shed 25 pounds and most of his locks, but he still demanded to join key enterprise gatherings. I'd been ferrying him to each visit because Elena had begun inventing excuses. "I can't bear this anymore," she confided one afternoon while Michael napped after his recent chemo round. "You're superior at caring for him anyway. He requires someone tougher presently, tougher." As if cherishing my son through his ailment was a chore rather than an honor. By autumn, I'd relocated to their spare chamber. Michael needed aid with fundamental duties, preparing dishes he could retain, overseeing his remedies, commuting to and from therapies when he was too frail to operate a vehicle. Elena had withdrawn to her study, asserting she was coping with emotional strain by remaining occupied. The reality was plainer. She was scheming her departure. I'd overhear her on calls with property brokers, debating asset values and market schedules. She'd investigated separation lawyers, though she never submitted forms. Why trouble when cancer would resolve her issue more effectively? "How much longer will this last?" she'd queried me one night in November while Michael rested upstairs. "I have schemes to devise. Charles, I can't suspend my existence forever." I'd gaped at her, mute. My son was warring for his life, and she was annoyed by the hassle. But Michael perceived more than I'd grasped. During his ultimate month, when therapies ceased functioning and palliative care commenced, he'd arranged enigmatic meetings with William Carter, his kin attorney. They'd convene in Michael's home study for hours, reviewing papers I wasn't permitted to view. "Tut, Dad, I've secured your tomorrow," he informed me during one of our final genuine talks. His voice was feeble, but his eyes keen with intent. "Trust William. He'll clarify all after I'm gone. Michael, you needn't fret about me. Just concentrate on recovering." "I'm not recovering." His candor was harsh and pure, like all about him. "But I've ensured Elena can't harm you or anyone else who counted to me." I hadn't comprehended his meaning then, perched by his grave now, observing the caretakers near with their spades. I was starting to suspect my son had been devising one last endeavor, the most vital of his existence. The breeze grew fiercer, and the final attendees had vanished. Patricia had retreated to her vehicle, granting me room to mourn alone. Soon I'd have to abandon Michael here in the frigid soil and return to a realm where Elena thought she'd triumphed all. But something in my son's closing words implied the contest wasn't concluded yet. Footsteps crunched over the graveyard pebbles behind me. I pivoted to spot Mark Sullivan nearing with Patricia and 3 other co-workers, their expressions grave with authentic sorrow. These were folks who had genuinely valued Michael, unlike the lady standing 18 feet away, still inspecting her phone. "Charles." Mark offered his hand, his clasp solid and warm. Michael was genius. His firm transformed the whole sector. The manner he overhauled design management tools. We'll never witness another intellect like his. Before I could answer, Elena's voice sliced through the chill air like shards. "Yes, and now that genius will ultimately yield rewards." She raised her gaze from her screen with a content grin. "All those years of toil are set to aid the proper individuals." Mark's face blanched. Patricia stepped nearer to me, her nurturing senses detecting peril. The other colleagues swapped awkward looks, abruptly finding their footwear captivating. "Elena," I uttered softly, "these people are here to commemorate Michael." "Oh, I'm commemorating him." She slid her phone into her purse with intentional leisure by ensuring his triumph isn't squandered on emotion. "Dr. Emily Wong, one of Michael's chief programmers," cleared her throat clumsily. "We should likely return to the workplace. There are initiatives to debate." "Actually," Elena said, her tone ascending with phony enthusiasm, "there won't be any initiatives for some time. I'll be restructuring all once the formalities conclude." Mark's jaw clenched. "Elena, Michael constructed that firm with particular aims. His crew knows how to. His crew labors for me now." She inspected her lavish watch, the one Michael had acquired for their milestone. "Everything labors for me now." Patricia discreetly slipped a tiny slip into my palm, her contact scribed in neat writing. "If you require anything," she murmured, "you can always ring." I nodded appreciatively, stowing the slip in my coat beside Patricia's number. The lingering guests initiated their uneasy exits, whispering swift sympathies before rushing to the parking zone. "Mrs." Patterson shook her head as she bypassed Elena, censure etched on her aged traits. The youthful minister, who'd led the rite, appeared as if he wished to speak, then reconsidered. Within 12 minutes, only Elena and I stayed by Michael's grave. The warmth was declining as dusk neared, and my exhalations emerged in tiny white clouds. She seemed resistant to the chill, invigorated by some inner blaze I was just beginning to fathom. "Charles." Her inflection changed, turning corporate and keen. "We must address lodging setups." Something frosty lodged in my gut. "What do you imply?" "I imply your residence status." She withdrew her car fobs, rattling them restlessly. We'll manage this at the residence. There are papers you must review. The way she uttered papers made my architect's mind begin computing likelihoods. None favorable. Michael had been so meticulous about all else. Had he somehow overlooked shielding me from his own spouse? Elena, I've dwelled in that residence for 20 months since Michael fell ill. Yes. Her grin was sharp as winter gust. And now Michael is departed. She pivoted and strode to her gold BMW, her stilettos clicking on the asphalt with robotic accuracy. I watched her assured gait. The way she advanced like someone who'd already claimed a contest, I didn't realize we were engaging. Standing solitary by my son's grave. I experienced the first genuine dread I'd felt since his detection. Michael had cautioned me to trust William, but William wasn't present. The sole individual who might possess answers was departing from me toward a vehicle costing more than my yearly stipend. I gazed at Michael's photo once more, then creased the funeral booklet meticulously and tucked it into my jacket pocket beside Patricia's contact. Whatever Elena had orchestrated, I was about to uncover. The 20-minute drive to Westwood passed in stifling quiet. Elena drove with the stereo silent, her polished fingers wrapping the wheel in sync with some inner timer. I observed familiar Los Angeles outskirts glide past the side glass, each marker evoking drives I'd shared with Michael over the years. When we entered the rounded driveway of the Reynolds family estate, my beams captured something that halted my breath. 4 sizable valises positioned on the entry steps like forsaken baggage. "What are those?" I queried, though my stomach already sensed the response. Elena parked with intentional exactness and shut off the motor. "Your possessions are by the entrance. This residence is mine now." I stared at the valises, my mind declining to absorb what I viewed. "Elena, this is unlawful. I'm formally listed here. This is my address on all my records." She exited the vehicle and proceeded to the front entrance with confident paces, extracting her house keys. Perused the lease contract. "Charles, Michael leased you a space. The tenancy concluded with his demise. Lease contract." I trailed her up the stone steps, my limbs feeling frail. What lease contract instead of unlocking? She delved into her purse and withdrew a beige envelope. Inside were 4 sheets of legal papers, neatly printed and bearing Michael's mark from 15 months prior. "Space lease contract," she recited aloud, her voice crisp with contentment. "Month-by-month occupancy between owner Michael Reynolds and occupant Charles Reynolds. Automatic cessation upon owner's death." My hands quivered as I inspected the papers under the veranda glow. Michael's mark appeared genuine. The timelines were accurate. The juridical phrasing was exact and obligatory. "We just interred your husband," I uttered, my voice fracturing with incredulity. "And now my fresh existence commences." She positioned in the threshold, limbs folded, obstructing my access to the residence where I'd tended my ailing son. "Without you, Michael would never have desired this. He cherished me. He wanted me supported. Michael is deceased." Her voice was level, impassive. "I'm alive, and this asset is mine. The title is in my name as remaining partner." I peered past her into the cozy, illuminated corridor where Michael and I had exchanged so many dialogues during his sickness. The studio he'd erected for me was visible through the dining window. $12,000 worth of equipment and gear I'd scarcely had time to employ. My equipment. "My studio, your studio, is on my asset. You can organize to relocate everything once you locate a place to dwell. Where am I supposed to proceed? It's almost 8:00 on the day of my son's burial." "That's not my concern." She shifted aside just sufficiently to seize the entrance handle. "Your items are bundled. Your occupancy has lapsed. If you're not departed in 20 minutes, I'll summon the authorities for intrusion." The nonchalant brutality in her tone was stunning. This lady had dined at my board, had accepted my attention during Michael's sickness, had grinned and portrayed the devoted spouse while plotting this precise instant. I proceeded to my aged Toyota Camry and commenced loading the valises into the boot and rear seat. All I possessed now fitted in 4 bags: garments, several volumes, Michael's snapshots, and the tiny crate of toy rockets we'd assembled together when he was youthful. Elena observed from the threshold, her outline framed by the warm glow of the residence that was no longer mine. She didn't stir to assist. She didn't utter. She merely awaited my completion and departure. As I sealed the car boot, she proclaimed one ultimate assertion: "Don't return without a scheduling. Charles, this is private asset now." The entrance shut with a firm snap, followed by the noise of locks engaging. Lights started extinguishing in the residence, chamber by chamber, as if she was obliterating my existence from every area I'd inhabited. I sat in my vehicle momentarily, motor operating, warmth blasting against my face. Through the pane, I could view the studio Michael had constructed, the equipment sparkling in the gloom. 20 months of my life had been expended in that residence, tending my son, witnessing him war and falter and perish with honor. Now I was houseless on the day of his burial. The stereo played gentle blues as I drove from Westwood, following markers toward Los Angeles's cheaper lodgings. In my rear mirror, the Reynolds estate diminished until it vanished completely, taking the last tangible link to my son's existence. But Elena had committed one error. She'd revealed her strategy too soon. Michael had been devising something with William Carter, and tomorrow I was going to discover what. The blinking neon indicating vacancy at the Sunset Lodge appeared like a rescue in the increasing obscurity. I'd spent 3 hours navigating Los Angeles's outer districts, comparing prices at places that grew steadily dingier as my choices shrank. $75 nightly was feasible for a few evenings, though my humble reserves wouldn't extend much further. The counter attendant scarcely glanced from his periodical when I registered. Room 145 was at the distant end of the lot, squeezed between a loud vending unit and a stairway reeking of tobacco and commercial cleaner. Inside, the space felt like regressing an era-worn striped comforter, laminate furnishings from the 1990s, and a washroom hardly spacious enough to pivot. The disparity with the estate I'd deemed home mere hours before would have been comical, if not so crushing. I unpacked systematically, suspending my burial attire in the slim wardrobe and organizing my scant items on the tiny desk by the pane. The lease contract papers lay extended across the marred top like proof in a felony scene. Under the stark ceiling illumination, Michael's mark appeared even more legitimate, more condemning. Outside. Freeway hum persisted steadily past the lodge, interrupted by sporadic lorries shifting gears or cycles thundering toward the metropolis. The sound was strangely soothing, evidence that the world persisted even when your own existence had just veered off course. I located William Carter's card in my billfold behind a snapshot of Michael at his university commencement. The card was mildly creased from years of toting, but the contact remained readable. An antique dial phone rested on the bedside, another artifact from past decades that somehow suited my present plight. William responded on the 4th chime, his voice expertly cordial despite the tardy hour. "Carter and Partners. William here. William, this is Charles Reynolds. I regret calling so late, but I require juridical advice." "Charles." His inflection shifted promptly to sincere worry. My profoundest sympathies about Michael. He was a remarkable young fellow. What occurred, I detailed the expulsion, the lease contract, and Elena's calculated schedule. William heeded without disruption, sporadically emitting small acknowledgments that indicated he was noting meticulously. "Is this lawful?" I inquired when I'd concluded. "Can she truly eject me on the burial day?" "Regrettably, if the lease contract is valid, she possesses the juridical authority to end occupancy upon the owner's demise. California law is quite precise about month-by-month setups." He halted, and I could hear sheets shuffling. "However, there are other issues we must address. Can you visit my office tomorrow morning?" "What sort of issues?" Michael's will disclosure. "There are stipulations you should learn." Something in his tone accelerated my heartbeat. Stipulations. I can't debate particulars over the line, but Michael was very comprehensive in his scheming, very considerate about the folks he valued. Another halt. "Bring the lease contract papers with you. I'll need to scrutinize them thoroughly." We arranged the meeting for 11:00 the following morning. After disconnecting, I perched on the edge of the lodge bed, gazing at the lot where my Toyota sat, encircled by trucks and aging coupes. A household was unloading luggage 3 doors away: father, mother, and 3 young kids who seemed thrilled about their lodge escapade. I contemplated Michael's final terms. "Trust William, he'll elucidate all." At the time, I'd presumed he was referring to burial setups or basic estate affairs, but something in William's tone implied my son had been scheming more than I'd grasped. The snapshot of Michael at commencement grinned at me from the bedside. 23 years old, brimming with visions and tenacity, positioned beside me in his robe and cap. He'd whispered something that day. "Dad, someday I'll support you as you've supported me." Perhaps he'd discovered a method to fulfill that vow, even from the afterlife. I extinguished the stark ceiling light and reclined against the slim cushions. Through the barriers, I could hear a screen broadcasting comedy applause and the far sound of the household nearby settling for the night. Tomorrow I would discover what Michael had truly been orchestrating during those enigmatic sessions with William. Tonight I would attempt some rest, and ready for whatever disclosure awaited in the dawn. 5 days at the Sunset Lodge had instructed me the pattern of despair. Awaken at sunrise to freeway clamor. Bathe in a cubicle scarcely broad enough for my frame. Quick brew and old pastries from the dispenser. Tally the shrinking notes in my billfold, and compute how many more evenings I could sustain. April 25th dawned drab and cool, but it felt distinct. Today bore solutions. I attired meticulously in my finest attire, the gray one Michael had urged I purchase for his wedding 8 years prior. The irony wasn't overlooked. In the lodge's unforgiving reflector, I appeared as I was, a 68-year-old man striving to preserve honor while residing in a $75 nightly space. The commute downtown consumed 50 minutes through dawn congestion. Los Angeles's horizon materialized slowly, steel structures stretching toward cloudy skies that vowed rain. I'd navigated these avenues innumerable times during my architectural career, but today felt like venturing alien ground. Carter and Partners held the 32nd level of a shining office tower in the center. The lift ascent granted me time to stabilize my anxiety and revisit the queries I'd readied. William had been enigmatic during our call, mentioning astonishments and stipulations without details. The reception zone murmured costly juridical services, oak fittings, authentic paintings, and a vista of the Pacific that likely cost more monthly than my stipend. The assistant, a capable lady in her 40s, grinned warmly when I declared myself. "Mr. Reynolds, Mr. Carter awaits you. Meeting room C." William stood from behind a desk laden with juridical papers when I arrived. He was older than I'd anticipated, perhaps 60, with silver sides and the assured grip of someone habituated to managing others' dilemmas. Charles, thank you for arriving. His voice bore authentic warmth beneath the expert tone. Please take a seat. Coffee, thank you. I settled into a suede chair that probably exceeded my monthly lease. William, I need to comprehend my circumstance. Elena has clarified she views me as a barrier to eliminate. He dispensed coffee from a gold tray, his actions intentional and soothing. Michael left a very elaborate will. There will be astonishments. What astonishments Elena claims all belongs to her as the remaining partner. Michael foresaw diverse situations. William's grin was minor but uplifting. Trust the procedure. Charles, your son was extraordinarily comprehensive. I extracted the lease contract papers Elena had presented. What about this? Can she truly expel me based on Michael being my owner? William scrutinized the sheets meticulously, his demeanor disclosing nothing. The lease contract seems authentic. However, legacy law is intricate. There are safeguards for kin that override simple owner-occupant ties. What about the residence? Can I return? Remain at the lodge for now. His tone was resolute, but comforting. All will clarify very shortly. I have planned the official will disclosure for this Monday at 3 o'clock. All involved will attend. All involved, you, Elena, and any observers. Michael designated, Mark Sullivan from the firm, Patricia Hayes as kin delegate. He noted on a juridical tablet, the disclosure will be taped for juridical aims. Relief mingled with unease in my torso. William, I value your assistance, but I must inquire about your charges. My assets are restricted. Michael organized all juridical costs linked to his estate. You needn't fret about expenses. William's grin widened slightly. Your son considered all. Charles, absolutely all. Something in his inflection implied depths of significance I couldn't yet seize. Michael had always been an organizer, but the accuracy of these setups felt nearly otherworldly. Will Elena bring her own counsel? I anticipate so. She's qualified for juridical depiction during estate processes. William assembled the papers into tidy piles. Charles, I want you to grasp something vital. Michael cherished you profoundly. Every stipulation in his will mirrors that cherish. The words struck harder than anticipated. 5 days of wrath and despair had briefly concealed my mourning, but William's quiet assurance brought it surging back. My son had been shielding me even while combating cancer, even while his spouse was plotting my ruin. Monday at 3 o'clock, William affirmed, handing me a scheduling card. 32nd level, meeting room B. Bring proof and any papers you deem pertinent. I rose to depart, feeling steadier than since the burial. William, can you offer any clue about what Michael orchestrated? Trust your son's discernment. His grip was firm and conclusive. He knew precisely what he was executing. The lift descent felt different from the ascent. Instead of despair propelling me toward William's office, I bore cautious optimism. Michael had been 4 moves ahead of all during his sickness, evidently including his spouse. Driving back to the lodge through midday congestion, I contemplated Monday's clash. Elena would arrive anticipating total conquest, likely with costly juridical backing. She'd spent 5 days scheming her subsequent actions, assured in her stance. But Michael had been scheming much lengthier. Monday morning dawned with the sort of biting gust that makes April feel like winter's ultimate attack. I'd spent the prior 4 days at the lodge in a peculiar state of paused existence, too anxious to peruse, too agitated to slumber properly, too impoverished to do aught but await. By noon, I was attired in my burial attire again, inspecting my appearance in the lodge's merciless reflector. The face reflecting showed every one of my 68 years. plus the burden of the past week's trials, but my eyes held something they hadn't since Michael's detection. Intent. The commute downtown felt distinct this time. Instead of despair driving me toward William's office, I was advancing toward solutions. Whatever Michael had orchestrated, today would unveil his final endeavor, and I suspected it would be his triumph. I reached Carter and Partners 20 minutes early, partly from worry and partly from regard for the gravity of the event. The same assistant greeted me with expert compassion, guiding me to meeting room B, larger than where William and I had convened, with a panorama of the whole central area. William was already present, encircled by heaps of juridical papers and what seemed audio taping gear. His manner was serene but vigilant, like a healer prepping for an intricate procedure. Charles, punctual as ever. He motioned to a seat opposite the table's head. The others should appear soon. Others proved a procession of individuals whose responses would shape the afternoon. Mark Sullivan arrived initially, appearing uncomfortable in attire that implied he'd prefer coding to juridical events. Patricia Hayes followed, toting a small bag and donning the look of someone braced for kin turmoil. Then Elena entered. She glided into the meeting room like a lady attending her enthronement, clad in a costly dark ensemble that contrived to appear both suitably grave and victoriously stylish. Behind her strode a keen-faced lady in her 50s, bearing a suede case that shouted premium juridical depiction. Susan Fletcher. The lady presented herself with a sharp grip. I'm depicting Mrs. Reynolds' concerns during these processes. Elena settled into her seat with the contentment of someone who'd already prevailed. She scarcely recognized my existence, instead concentrating on the juridical papers spread across William's table end. Her grin was small but evident. Charles, why did you even appear? There's naught here for you. The words were conveyed with casual savagery, audible for all. Susan Fletcher placed a restraining palm on her client's limb, but the harm was inflicted. Mark fidgeted uneasily. Patricia's face stiffened with disapproval. I'm here by juridical right as Michael's father, I responded quietly. Juridical right to what you've been residing in my residence as an occupant. That setup ended with my husband's demise. Elena's voice bore total certainty. Susan has examined all the records. All belongs to me as the remaining partner. William cleared his throat, demanding focus with expert command. Please, all settle. Michael's will is very explicit about all allocations. Let's proceed with appropriate decorum. Susan Fletcher opened her case, extracting juridical tablets and what appeared ready disputes. My client anticipates receiving the whole legacy as the lawful spouse. We're ready to contest any anomalous stipulations. Noted. William stated simply. He initiated the taping gear with a gentle snap. This is the official disclosure of the last will and testament of Michael Thomas Reynolds, dated January 20th, 2025. Present are Charles Reynolds, father, Elena Reynolds, remaining spouse, Susan Fletcher, counsel for Mrs. Reynolds, Mark Sullivan, and Patricia Hayes, appointed observers. The room grew hushed except for the faint buzz of traffic 32 floors beneath. Elena leaned ahead slightly, her stance exuding assurance. I clutched the chair's arms, bracing for letdown, but aspiring for equity. William opened the thick record, his voice adopting the formal rhythm of juridical processes. I, Michael Thomas Reynolds, being of sound intellect and physique, do hereby institute this as my ultimate will and testament, annulling all prior wills and amendments. The introductory phrasing washed over me like ambient sound. My architect's mind was centered on the essence that would decide whether I'd pass my remaining years in a lodge chamber or something akin to home. Elena's fingers tapped silently on the meeting table, maintaining rhythm with her inner countdown to triumph. But William's minor grin implied the afternoon bore astonishments none of us anticipated. "Now we arrive at the specific legacies and allocations," William declared, turning to the record's pivotal sheets. The instant of truth had come. "To my cherished spouse, Elena Reynolds," William's voice traversed the silent meeting room with calculated accuracy, "I bequeath the following properties: the kin dwelling at 1568 Oak Ridge Lane, Westwood, California, including all fittings and personal items within. All automobiles currently listed in my name, including the 2025 BMW 7 Series and 2024 Porsche Cayenne. The deposit and reserve accounts at National Bank of Los Angeles, totaling roughly $400,000. Elena's smile flourished like venomous blossoms. She reclined in her chair with evident contentment, casting a victorious glance my way. "See, Charles, I told you you'd receive zilch." Susan Fletcher was noting meticulously, but her look suggested standard satisfaction rather than surprise. Mark Sullivan gazed at his palms, likely computing the enterprise ramifications of Elena's legacy. Patricia Hayes observed me with concern, evidently expecting ruin. William persisted reading without recognizing Elena's disruption. "Additionally, Mrs. Reynolds receives all ornaments, artworks, and mementos acquired during our union, valued at approximately $90,000. "William," Elena said with phony gentleness, "I think we've addressed everything significant. Charles can see that Michael was very explicit about his aims." "Actually," William replied serenely, "we've only addressed the initial allocations. There are further legacies." He turned the sheet with intentional slowness. "To my father, Charles Reynolds, who forfeited 24 months of his retirement to tend me during my sickness." My heart halted. Michael had recalled, even while perishing. He'd safeguarded me. "I bequeath 60% ownership of Innovatech Designs, including all equities, ballot privileges, and payout distributions. This represents approximately $40 million in current market assessment." The quiet that ensued was overwhelming. Elena's face leached of hue as if a tap had been opened. Susan Fletcher's stylus froze mid-note. Mark Sullivan's head jerked up with astonishment, and something resembling relief, what Elena's voice fractured like shattering crystal. "That's impossible. I'm his spouse. All should belong to me." William continued reading, as if she hadn't uttered. "Additionally, Mr. Charles Reynolds receives the studio and all equipment erected for his use, to be moved to asset of his selection. All toy rocket collections assembled together during Michael's youth, and the sum of $200,000 from the Remembrance Learning Fund." I couldn't inhale. 60% of Michael's firm. $40 million. The studio he'd built for my retirement. After a week of homelessness and despair, my son had granted me security beyond any fantasy. This is deceit. Elena leapt to her feet, her meticulously assembled veneer splintering utterly. "I'll dispute this ruling. You engineered this. You plotting elder." "Elena," I managed through my astonishment, "this is juridical. Michael had the authority to allocate his properties as he chose." Juridical. Her chuckle was keen and bitter. "You think I'll permit you to pilfer half of what is mine, Susan? Tell them this is disputable." Susan Fletcher was hectically reviewing her notes, clearly recalibrating her whole tactic. "There may be bases for undue sway assertions, but nothing." Elena's voice escalated to near yelling. Michael was ailing, expiring. His discernment was impaired. This elder exploited his state. Mark Sullivan finally spoke, his voice soft but resolute. Elena. I was present during numerous of Michael's enterprise sessions right until the close. His intellect was entirely lucid. He knew precisely what he was doing. You're all plotters. Elena spun to confront William. How much did Charles compensate you to compose this fabrication? William's voice stayed expertly serene despite her charges. Mrs. Reynolds, I comprehend your disappointment, but these allocations were wholly Michael's choice. He expended considerable time ensuring every detail was juridically solid. Elena turned back to me, her eyes flaming with rage that made her prior brutality seem mild. You think you've gained something. Elder, I'll seize all from you. Every cent, every equity, every tool in that studio. By the time my counsels conclude, you'll be residing in that lodge for the remainder of your wretched existence. Patricia Hayes reached across the table and squeezed my hand tenderly. Michael cherished you very much, she whispered. But William was arranging his papers with the careful focus of someone whose task wasn't complete. Mrs. Reynolds, please sit. We haven't finished the disclosure. What else could there conceivably be? Elena stayed upright, her hands planted on the meeting table like armaments. William's grin was minor but unmistakable. There is one more stipulation that impacts all prior allocations. The atmosphere in the room seemed to plummet 12 degrees. Whatever explosive Michael had readied, William was about to ignite it. William's minor grin intensified as he reached for another record from his meticulously arranged heap. The meeting room grew silent, except for the gentle whir of taping gear and Elena's strained inhalations as she absorbed the crushing news about divided legacy. There is one more provision in the will, William proclaimed, his voice bearing the gravity of an ultimate unveiling. A special stipulation that Michael added 4 weeks before his demise. Elena's eyes constricted perilously. What stipulation? You're concealing something. The stipulation declares, William read with calculated accuracy, that if my spouse Elena attempts to compel my father Charles to depart our kin home within 18 months of my demise, the entire legacy, including residence, automobiles, bank reserves, and enterprise equities, automatically shifts in full to Charles Reynolds. The quiet that followed was total. Even the traffic clamor from 32 floors below seemed to cease. Elena's face leached of hue as the ramifications crashed over her like a falling structure. No. Her voice fractured with desperate incredulity. This is a snare. He couldn't have known. Michael also left a videotaping explaining his motives, William continued, setting up a small display. He wanted you to comprehend his rationale. The monitor flickered to existence, and Michael's familiar visage appeared, slimmer than in vigor, but with eyes sharp with wit and affection. My heart nearly halted seeing my son again, hearing his voice from beyond demise. Elena was panting now, her hands clutching the meeting table until her joints whitened. Susan Fletcher was hectically noting, but her face showed expert alarm at her client's complete juridical downfall. Dad, Michael proceeded, gazing directly into the lens with that architect's precision I instilled in him. I'm sorry you had to endure her savagery, but I've shielded you. All I constructed, all I amassed, it's yours now. Employ it wisely. Live comfortably. Honor Mom's memory in that residence. The video paused, and William's soft voice filled the stunned quiet. The expulsion happened on April 20th, the day of Michael's burial. The stipulation was promptly activated. All properties shift to Charles Reynolds, effective at once. This isn't juridical. Elena's voice rose to near shrieking. A will can't have stipulations like this. Actually, it can, William replied serenely. Conditional legacy is perfectly lawful in California when the stipulations are clearly articulated and not contrary to public order. Michael consulted broadly to ensure enforceability. Susan Fletcher finally located her voice. We'll dispute this promptly. Undue sway, mental disability, fraudulent. The video resumes. William interrupted, restarting the taping. Michael grinned sadly from the display. Elena, I cherished you for 8 years. I provided you all I could. But affection without compassion is mere ownership. Dad taught me to treat folks with honor, especially kin. I hoped union would instill the same principles in you. Elena emitted a strangling noise and bent over as if physically hit. If you had displayed Dad even fundamental respect after my demise, you would have inherited all as my spouse. But I knew your essence. I wagered on your avarice surpassing your prudence. Michael's look was mournful, but determined. I lost that wager, but Dad secured his tomorrow. The video concluded with Michael uttering quietly, I cherish you both, but I shield the folks who cherish others more than themselves. William deactivated the display and faced the devastated room. The juridical shift commences at once. Mrs. Reynolds, you have 45 days to leave the asset. Elena's inhalations became swift and shallow. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped ahead in her chair. Susan Fletcher caught her as she fainted, summoning medical aid. As emergency responders were called, and Elena was revived with aromatic salts. I sat immobile, overwhelmed by the scale of my son's affection and foresight. He had known precisely who his spouse was, and precisely how she would act, even perishing. He had safeguarded me with operative precision. Mark Sullivan broke the stunned quiet. Michael was always 4 steps ahead of everyone else. Patricia Hayes reached over and squeezed my hand. He rescued you. Charles, even from the grave. He rescued you. Elena was assisted from the meeting room by responders, Susan Fletcher trailing with defeated expertise. As they vanished into the corridor, William began organizing papers for prompt juridical shift. I remained seated, staring at the blank video display where my son's visage had been. Michael had granted me all security, honor, and the profound awareness that his affection would shield me eternally. The contest was concluded. Equity had been delivered by the most affectionate hand I'd ever known. The subsequent 3 months became a lesson in juridical uselessness. Despite forfeiting all through her own deeds, Elena hurled herself into disputing Michael's will with the desperation of someone submerging in repercussions she'd forged herself. Susan Fletcher's law practice occupied a whole level of a Sunset Boulevard skyscraper, their granite foyer adorned with accolades for intricate lawsuits. But all their skill couldn't surmount one basic dilemma. Michael had been wiser than everyone else involved, including them. The conditional provision is biased, Susan contended during the initial session on May 5th. It penalizes my client for exercising her juridical rights as asset holder. Judge Elizabeth Morgan, a lady in her 70s with iron-gray locks and no tolerance for trivial contentions, reviewed the papers with medical accuracy. The bequeather had full juridical authority to establish legacy stipulations. Counselor, nothing in California law prevents conditional legacies based on beneficiary conduct. I attended every session from the audience, watching Elena's juridical crew exhaust every feasible angle of assault, undue sway, mental incapacity, fraudulent records, biased stipulations. Each contention crumbled under William's systematic defense and the video proof of Michael's lucid reasoning. Mr. Reynolds, William had explained during our prep meetings. Michael spent 4 months crafting phrasing that would endure any juridical dispute. He consulted legacy planning experts, constitutional counsels, and behavioral analysts. This will is impenetrable. The evidence phase unveiled crushing proof for Elena's case. Observers testified about her conduct at the burial. Mark Sullivan described her growing absence during Michael's sickness. Patricia Hayes recounted years of noting Elena's acquisitive priorities, even misses. Patterson from the congregation provided testimony about unsuitable remarks during the rite. The departed demonstrated clear intellectual capacity throughout his ailment, testified Dr. Anderson. Michael's cancer specialist, Mr. Reynolds, continued making complex enterprise choices until weeks before his demise. His cognitive operation was never hindered. Elena's own testimony proved catastrophic. Under vow. She couldn't deny expelling me on the burial day. She couldn't explain her absence during Michael's health visits. Most damaging, she admitted accessing legacy funds on juridical fees before the will was even validated. So, you accessed estate reserves right after your husband's demise? William asked during interrogation. I had expenses to cover, Elena snapped, her carefully trained poise cracking. The burial costs, juridical consultations, including deposits for disputing the will you assumed would grant you all. Susan Fletcher's protest was upheld, but the harm was inflicted. Elena had revealed precisely the mindset Michael had anticipated and guarded against. By mid-June, even Susan Fletcher was advising compromise. Charles, this isn't concluded, Elena declared after another failed petition. I'll discover another way to combat this. But her assets were depleting as swiftly as her juridical options. The costly law practice required substantial deposits. Expert observers cost thousands daily. Meanwhile, William's charges were covered by the estate, granting us boundless juridical strength. The ultimate session on June 20th lasted only 40 minutes. Judge Morgan had reached her ruling based on overwhelming proof of Michael's intellectual capacity, the will's juridical validity, and Elena's clear activation of the conditional provision. The bequeather created a juridical record expressing his clear aims regarding asset allocation. Judge Morgan proclaimed the conditional legacy provision was properly executed when the remaining spouse expelled the bequeather's father from the kin dwelling. All disputes are rejected. Costs are awarded against the applicant. Elena's shoulders drooped as the hammer fell. 3 months of costly juridical warfare had ended exactly where Michael's video had predicted, with her forfeiting all through her own selections. William and I stood in the courthouse corridor afterward, watching Elena and Susan Fletcher disappear toward the lifts. She moved with the vanquished posture of someone who had finally grasped the cost of savagery. Your son was exceptional, William said softly. In 35 years of estate law, I've never seen scheming this comprehensive. Michael always completed what he initiated, I replied, thinking of all the toy rockets we'd assembled together, all the endeavors he'd finished with architectural precision. This had been his ultimate endeavor, ensuring equity through affection, protection through insight, and repercussions through choice. Even demise couldn't halt Michael from supporting the folks who mattered to him. Equity had been served not through vengeance, but through the simple verity that deeds have repercussions, and affection shields those who merit protection. July 1st dawned bright and mild. The kind of Los Angeles morning that promises summer is finally arriving. I stood on the entry steps of the Reynolds estate, holding the same keys Michael had given me 20 months earlier when I'd moved in to tend him. This time, though, I wasn't a visitor or occupant. I was home. The lock turned smoothly, and the front entrance opened onto the corridor where Elena had stood. blocking my entry just 3 months ago. Now the residents felt altered, not because anything had changed materially, but because affection and equity had reclaimed it from avarice and brutality. Elena had departed the prior week with surprising honor. Our final dialogue had been short but polite. "You prevailed, Charles," she'd said while packing her ornament case. "But Michael won't return." "You're correct," I'd replied. "But his affection and insight endure." She nodded slowly, perhaps finally comprehending that this hadn't been about prevailing or forfeiting, but about repercussions and integrity. I'd even assisted her carry valises to her vehicle, because Michael had raised me to treat folks with honor, regardless of how they'd treated me. The residents felt tranquil now, filled with recollections of Michael's youth and accomplishments rather than the strain of his final months. I'd kept his home study exactly as he'd left it. And that's where I was perched when Mark Sullivan called to discuss our first official enterprise meeting. "Charles, I know you never planned to operate a technology firm," Mark said over the line. "But Michael left detailed tactical plans for the next 6 years. With your supervision and my operations oversight, we can build something worthy of his vision." "What did you envision expansion into instructional tools?" Michael believed technology should aid folks in learning and developing, not just organizing their timetables. We could create educational platforms for architecture students, maybe collaborate with UCLA. The dialogue continued for 90 minutes, covering expansion forecasts, recruitment plans, and Michael's notes about corporate communal duty. My son had built more than an enterprise. He'd created a stage for positive transformation. As the primary holder, I could ensure that stage served purposes beyond gain. "Mark, I want to establish something else," I said as our call ended. "The Michael Reynolds Remembrance Scholarship Fund. Full support for architecture students from laboring families. Youths who have the intellect, but not the finances." Michael would adore that concept. After disconnecting, I walked through the residence, reacquainting myself with chambers that held decades of kin history. In the studio Michael had built for my retirement, I found a partially completed toy rocket, an F-16 Falcon we'd started together during one of his better days. I sat at the workbench and picked up the small brushes, painting the fins the same vivid green Michael had chosen for his childhood rockets. Patricia Hayes visited that night, bringing a stew and the kind of practical solace that kin provides during shifts. "How are you adapting to all this?" she asked, settling into Michael's preferred seat with a mug of herbal drink. "It's overpowering at times," I admitted. "The funds, the enterprise, the accountability. But I keep hearing Michael's voice telling me to employ it wisely." He orchestrated everything flawlessly. Didn't he better than flawless? He knew Elena would reveal her true essence, and he shielded me from it. Even perishing, he was supporting his old dad. Patricia smiled sorrowfully. "That lad cherished you more than his own existence." Later that evening, I sat in Michael's study reviewing the scholarship fund paperwork William had prepared. The initiative would provide full fees, living costs, and guidance for 25 students yearly. In 12 years, we'd have assisted 300 bright youths achieve their aspirations. The phone rang as I was sealing the files. The identifier showed UCLA Mr. Reynolds. "This is Professor Emily Wong. I wanted to personally thank you for establishing the Remembrance Scholarship Fund. The first beneficiary is a young lady from the East Side whose father works 4 jobs to sustain the household. She reminds me so much of Michael. Brilliant, tenacious, and focused on using architecture to aid people." After the call ended, I sat quietly in the gathering twilight, looking at Michael's photo on the desk. At 23, He'd been full of dreams about altering the world through technology. Now, even after demise, he was making those dreams possible for others, outside. Westwood settled into evening stillness. The residents felt alive with intent rather than vacant with mourning. Michael's affection had created not just equity, but ongoing aspiration for the future. Her cruelty had been transformed into opportunity for deserving young people. I picked up the tiny F-16 Falcon model and painted one more green stripe across its fin. Some traditions were worth continuing, some affection was worth honoring, and some equity was worth the wait. Michael had been right about everything. As usual, affection shields, insight prevails, and sometimes, if you scheme carefully enough, you can support the people you cherish, even after you're gone. The old studio hummed quietly around me as I worked, and I could almost hear my son's voice. "Looking good, Dad, but maybe add a little more green on the nose section." If you enjoyed this tale, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts on this story in the comments. To hear the next tale, click on the box on the right. Thank you for watching.